The first thing I noticed in the courtroom was how cold it felt, as if someone had opened a window in the dead of winter and left it wide open for hours. The Franklin County Domestic Relations Court in Ohio always looked stern in photos, but standing inside it made me realize how small a person could feel under fluorescent lights that showed every flaw and every fear. I stood there, hands twisting together, trying to convince myself that I was not about to lose everything that mattered. My name is Madeline Foster, though everyone calls me Maddie, and I was living the kind of nightmare I used to think only happened to other people in dramatic news stories. A clerk called my case number with a flat voice, and that sound alone nearly took my legs out from under me. My soon-to-be ex-husband, Robert Hale, sat across the room with his attorney. His face looked calm, almost relaxed, and I hated that I could still recognize the faint smirk he wore whenever he thought he had outsmarted me. His navy suit appeared crisp, his hair neatly parted, and from a distance he resembled a respectable financial advisor, not the man who had spent years slowly tightening the grip around my life, until I forgot what it felt like to walk freely. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reviewing the stack of documents in front of him, while Robert's attorney rose smoothly. He spoke with perfect confidence, as if he believed every word that came out of his mouth was the indisputable truth. According to him, I was emotionally unstable, unpredictable, and unfit to be the primary caregiver for my 6-year-old daughter Lila. He described me like someone I did not recognize, someone made of chaos and danger, someone who could barely function without breaking down. The attorney clicked his remote and a video appeared on the courtroom monitor. It was footage of me sitting on my bedroom floor with my back against the bed frame, crying so hard I could barely breathe. My face was red, my hair messy, my voice shaking. In the clip, I raised my voice once, but it was because Robert had just cornered me before he started recording, though of course that part was missing. The attorney claimed the video proved I was hysterical, volatile, and unsafe. I tried to speak to explain, but my voice cracked as if my throat had forgotten how to work. The judge's eyes flickered with concern, but not toward me. He looked toward Robert as if Robert were the one suffering. Robert lowered his gaze and pressed a hand to his forehead in a rehearsed gesture of burden and sorrow, convincing anyone who did not know him that he was a patient man driven to exhaustion by a difficult wife. My heart thudded painfully as the attorney displayed photos next. Pictures of a messy kitchen toys scattered in the living room and clothes piled in a basket. What the photos did not show was that I had been working a 16-hour week at the elementary school during parent conference season, and Lila had been sick with a fever. But that context was gone, replaced by the cold implication that I was neglectful and irresponsible. I felt the panic rising fast and merciless. The judge leaned forward with the kind of expression that told me he already knew the direction of his ruling. I could sense it. Robert could sense it. Even the bailiff shifted as if preparing for the hearing to wrap up. The judge inhaled in a way that made my stomach twist. He began to speak slowly, his tone heavy with finality. He said he was leaning toward granting Robert temporary sole custody until the court could further evaluate my emotional stability. The words hit me harder than any blow. I felt my chest tighten my lungs, lock my vision blur around the edges. Losing Lila was not something I could survive. My knees weakened and I thought I might collapse right there on the courtroom floor. And then, suddenly, the heavy wooden door at the back of the room swung open so hard it slammed into the wall. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Everyone turned. My twin sister, Marissa Foster, stepped inside. Her expression was hard and controlled, the kind of look she only wore when she was about to do something irreversible. She had flown in from Colorado only 2 days earlier, but I had no idea she would come to court. She walked straight toward the judge's bench, ignoring Robert's startled whisper. In her hand was a small silver USB drive that reflected the harsh courtroom lights. Her voice was steady, but every word cut through the room with absolute clarity. Your Honor, I have evidence that needs to be seen. My sister does not know about it, but it is critical to this case. The entire courtroom froze. Robert's face went pale so fast it was almost shocking. His attorney shot up from his chair and barked out an objection, claiming the evidence was improper, unfair, and not previously disclosed. The judge raised a hand to silence him. Bring it forward, he said. His voice held a note I had not heard all morning, a subtle shift from certainty to suspicion. Marissa approached the bench and handed the USB to the clerk. My heart hammered so loudly that I could barely hear myself breathe. Marissa stepped back beside me and squeezed my hand. "Just trust me," she whispered. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. Every person in that courtroom turned toward the screen. The judge leaned closer. Robert stared, unable to hide the panic flashing through his eyes. And as the video began to play, an icy wave swept across the room. People inhaled sharply. Someone at the back whispered an oath under their breath, because the moment the footage started, everyone immediately understood that whatever they were about to see would change everything. The screen glowed, the first frame appeared, and then the courtroom fell completely silent. Before everything fell apart, people who looked at our family from the outside often said we were the picture-perfect American household. Our blue-gray two-story home sat on a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio, where the lawns were neatly trimmed and the mailboxes were decorated with cheerful seasonal wreaths. I used to wave to neighbors on my morning walks, holding a travel mug of coffee and listening to Lila chatter about everything she saw. The sun always seemed to shine a little softer on our street, and for years I convinced myself that meant life was good. I had been an elementary school teacher for over a decade, the kind of person who always kept extra snacks in her desk drawer for kids who forgot lunch or needed a little comfort. Teaching came naturally to me. I liked the routine, the purpose, the daily small victories. My students loved me, and I loved them. I never imagined a life that did not revolve around helping children grow. When Lila was born, everything felt brighter. She had these huge hazel eyes that made her look like she understood more than any baby should. Robert held her in the hospital with a proud grin and promised he would always protect us. I believed him. Back then, he was charming and attentive, the type of man who opened car doors and brought home flowers for no reason. He worked as a financial advisor at a respected firm in Columbus, the type of job that came with polished shoes, tailored suits, and long hours he claimed were necessary to provide for us. Our neighbors adored him. At neighborhood barbecues, people always pulled me aside to tell me how lucky I was to have such a kind husband. They said he seemed grounded, humble, loyal. I used to smile and nod, pretending I did not already feel a small knot in my stomach whenever he was around. Because behind closed doors, Robert changed. The warm tone he used with neighbors disappeared. The gentle smile vanished. At first, the shifts were subtle. So subtle, I thought I had imagined them. He corrected me constantly, tiny criticisms sprinkled into ordinary conversations. He told me I talked too much, then accused me of shutting down when I tried to stay quiet. He said I was too emotional, too sensitive, too needy. He questioned why I spent so much time grading papers at home when he claimed my salary barely mattered. He wanted to know where I was at all times and suggested I wear more professional clothes even when I was just running to the grocery store. It felt like a slow tightening, like someone gradually wrapping a rope around my chest so gently I did not notice until breathing became difficult. Still, nobody else saw it. To everyone else, Robert was thoughtful, generous, and easygoing. He donated to school fundraisers, offered financial advice to neighbors, and always helped older couples lift heavy items. People admired him, they trusted him, and I did everything I could to maintain the image he projected, because admitting the truth felt like admitting I had failed at the most important choice of my life. Our home reflected the illusion. Robert insisted on perfectly arranged furniture, spotless countertops, and an appearance of calm routine. I made dinners, packed lunches, drove Lila to school, washed the laundry, and ensured everything looked effortless. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I anticipated his needs better, if I kept the house perfect, he would soften again. He would be the man I married. But the truth was, the man I married existed only in the early chapters of our relationship, and the version of him who lived in our home now was someone I could not recognize. Still, there were good days. That was how emotional manipulation worked. Some mornings he brought me coffee or asked about a tough student at school. Sometimes he played dolls with Lila on the living room carpet, laughing with her until she fell over in giggles. On those days, I let myself believe that the darkness creeping into our marriage was temporary, that stress at work would ease, that we would find our way back. Those hopeful moments felt like warm sunlight cutting through thick clouds, and I clung to them fiercely. But even on the best days, something always felt fragile. If dinner was too salty, he would sigh deeply as if I had personally ruined his night. If Lila spilled juice on the rug, he acted as if the accident proved I was careless. If I expressed hurt, he said I was imagining things. And if I grew quiet to avoid conflict, he accused me of being passive-aggressive. I spent years walking on a floor made of thin glass, never knowing which step would cause it to crack. I did not tell anyone. Not my parents, not my colleagues, not even Marissa, my twin sister, who had always been the braver, louder, and sharper version of me. I kept everything hidden behind polite smiles and holiday cards that showed us posing in matching outfits. The world saw a family glowing with warmth. I saw a life shrinking inch by inch. But nothing compared to the moment I realized Robert had stopped pretending even in front of Lila. That was the moment the coldness inside our home became impossible to ignore. And once I noticed it, everything started to unravel in ways I never could have prepared for. The shift from subtle discomfort to unmistakable control happened so gradually that for a long time I believed I was the one changing. At first, it was little comments tossed out casually as if they were harmless observations. Robert would glance at the dress I wore for work and say something like, "It makes you look tired," or "I thought you cared more about your appearance." If I wore makeup, he would say I was trying too hard. If I did not, he said I looked sick. There was no version of me that pleased him, and yet I kept trying, adjusting myself in the mirror every morning, hoping to anticipate which version of me would trigger fewer sighs and fewer disapproving looks. When I tried to make plans with coworkers for a simple coffee after school, he would question why I needed to go. He would ask who would be there, how long I expected to stay, and why I did not prioritize spending time with my family. If I suggested he join, he claimed he was too busy or that it was ridiculous for a husband to tag along to school gatherings. The conversations always ended with me canceling plans to avoid making him upset. Over time, the invitations stopped coming because people noticed I always declined. At home, he monitored everything without ever explicitly saying he was monitoring it. If I took too long at the grocery store, he wanted to know why. If I took a shower after work, he wondered out loud if I was hiding something. If I spent time grading papers in the evening, he questioned why my job required so much from me when I was not earning enough to justify the hours. He wanted me accessible, compliant, predictable. I became increasingly aware of how much space he took up in every corner of my life, how even my private thoughts felt like they were under his scrutiny. Gaslighting became his favorite tool. Anytime I expressed discomfort about the way he spoke to me or the comments he made, he would tilt his head slightly, almost pityingly, and say I was imagining things. He told me I was overly dramatic, that I was misremembering conversations, that I had a habit of twisting his words. He repeated those accusations so many times that I started second-guessing my own mind. I would replay conversations in my head until the edges blurred, wondering if maybe he was right and I really was becoming sensitive, unstable, or confused. I was raised to believe marriage required patience and compromise, so I convinced myself his criticism had merit. If I cooked dinner late, I apologized. If I forgot to bring his shirts from the dryer, I apologized. If Lila cried because she was tired or overstimulated, I apologized. My entire vocabulary shrank to the same phrase repeated endlessly, "I am sorry." The emotional undulation became constant. One day, he would act affectionate asking about my class, complimenting my cooking offering to put Lila to bed. Moments like that made my chest warm, made me believe we were finally turning a corner. But the next day, he snapped over something trivial like the way I loaded the dishwasher or the time I walked through the front door after school. His kindness became a trap bait to keep me attached and hopeful, only for the cruel days to feel even harsher by comparison. The worst part was how he behaved around Lila. In front of her, he softened his tone, becoming the playful father who tossed her in the air and read bedtime stories with exaggerated funny voices. I used to watch them and feel an ache I could not name, a mixture of love and dread. Because I knew the moment Lila went to bed or left the room, the version of him she adored would vanish and the cold, controlled, clipped one would return. It confused her, I could tell. Some evenings when he criticized me in that sharp whisper, he reserved only for our private moments, She would glance nervously between us as if trying to decipher which parent was real. He noticed her confusion and turned it into another weapon. Whenever I tried to shield her from our tension, he accused me of poisoning Lila against him. He told me I was unstable and that Lila could sense it. He used her little hands, her innocent trust as leverage in every argument. I saw the change in her slowly. Our bubbly little girl who once sang while brushing her teeth and danced in the kitchen whenever I cooked became quieter. She watched us cautiously, especially when Robert entered a room. One night, after he snapped at me because the thermostat was set to the wrong temperature, I found her hiding behind the sofa, hugging her stuffed rabbit. She whispered that she did not want Daddy to be upset. The guilt crushed me so hard I could barely breathe. I promised her everything was fine and that Daddy was just tired, but even as I soothed her, I knew I was lying to her and to myself. Still, I told no one. Shame wrapped around my throat every time I imagined trying to explain what was happening. People liked Robert. They trusted him. They would never believe that the man who charmed entire rooms turned sharp and cruel the moment the door clicked shut. And a part of me feared that maybe he was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I really was too emotional, too sensitive, too unstable. That was how gaslighting worked. It did not break you all at once. It hollowed you out from the inside until you wondered whether your own instincts could be trusted. By the time I realized how deep the damage went, I was already trapped in a version of myself I barely recognized. And the worst part was that the real storm had not even begun. The first time the abuse crossed the line from emotional to physical, it did not look anything like the dramatic scenes people imagine when they hear the phrase domestic violence. There were no punches, no broken bones, no shouting loud enough for the neighbors to hear. It happened quietly in the kitchen on an ordinary Wednesday evening when the smell of garlic pasta filled the air, and Lila sat at the dining table coloring with a purple crayon. Robert came home later than he said he would, the front door clicking shut with that soft, deliberate sound he always made when he was irritated. I could tell before I even saw his face. His footsteps were too sharp, too quick, as if he was already blaming me for something. When he stepped into the kitchen, his eyes flicked immediately to the stove. He did not say hello. He did not ask about my day. He pointed at the pot and asked why dinner was not ready. I told him it just needed 2 more minutes and that I had kept it warm. He walked closer, and even now I remember the way his cologne mixed with the smell of sautéed garlic, a scent I used to love but would soon grow to hate. He reached for the pot without a mitt and hissed in pain when his finger grazed the hot rim. It was barely a touch, barely enough to redden the skin. But he turned to me with a look that froze my breath. "This is what happens when you never pay attention," he said. His voice was low calm, controlled the kind of tone that was far more terrifying than yelling. I opened my mouth to apologize, but before I could finish the sentence, he grabbed my wrist. It was not a violent yank, not the kind that left deep marks, but it was tight, far tighter than necessary, and so sudden I gasped. The shock of it traveled up my arm, cold and sharp. He squeezed just once, just long enough to make his point, then released me as if the whole thing had never happened. But the bruise bloomed later. Faint but undeniable, a dark ring of fingerprints around my wrist that I hid beneath long sleeves for days. When Lila asked if I got hurt at school, I forced a smile and told her it was nothing. After that night, the boundary between acceptable and abusive disappeared entirely. Robert learned he could get away with small acts of aggression as long as they were subtle enough to dismiss. He slammed doors inches from my face. He cornered me in hallways and spoke in a whisper so sharp it felt like it could cut skin. He grabbed my arm whenever he wanted my attention, always letting go before it turned into anything that could be photographed. He knocked a drinking glass off the counter once while glaring at me, watching it explode into shards across the tile. He called it an accident, but I knew better. These were the kinds of tactics that never made it into police reports, the kinds of things victims struggled to describe because each one on its own sounded small, almost insignificant. But together, they created an environment where every second of my life felt like walking through a minefield. The worst part was how carefully he timed his cruelty. He saved it for moments when Lila was in the room, but distracted enough not to fully understand. He wanted her to witness just enough to fear upsetting him, but not enough to tell someone. One Sunday morning when I reached for a cereal box on the top shelf, he stepped behind me and shut the cabinet door so forcefully it rattled the dishes. The cabinet door brushed my cheek as it slammed close enough to make my eyes sting. When I flinched, he smirked and said, "Maybe if you paid more attention, you would not startle so easily." Lila sat on the floor with her stuffed rabbit watching us with wide eyes. She asked if Daddy was mad. He knelt down instantly and wrapped his arms around her, telling her Mommy was just being overly dramatic again. That pattern repeated itself so many times that I began to anticipate it before it happened. If he was in a bad mood, he found a way to blame me for something that went wrong. If Lila spilled milk, he glared at me as if I had personally failed. If I cried, he accused me of manipulating him with tears. He twisted everything into a narrative where he was the reasonable one, and I was the unstable wife who could not keep her emotions under control. And then came the night he locked me outside. It was early fall, the air crisp and cool. I had stepped onto the porch for a breath of fresh air after an argument about his long work hours. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and desperate for 2 minutes of quiet. I had not even taken a full breath when the door clicked behind me. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I tried the handle. Locked. Through the small window beside the door, I saw Robert standing inside. He stared at me without expression, his face illuminated by the warm hallway light while I stood shivering in the dark. I knocked softly, afraid of waking Lila. He did not move. Minutes ticked by. My teeth began to chatter. I knocked again. Only after 10 minutes passed did he open the door, his face still calm, almost bored. He said, "If you walk out on me in the middle of a conversation, do not be surprised if I decide to give you the space you wanted." I walked past him silently, holding back tears, because crying in front of him always made things worse. That night when I checked on Lila, she was awake and clutching her blanket. She asked why Mommy was on the porch. She asked if Daddy was mad again. I lied to her and said everything was fine. But inside, I felt something crack. It was the first time I realized I was not just surviving his moods. I was surviving him. Still, I said nothing. I told myself other women had it worse. I told myself emotional bruises were not real enough to matter. I told myself marriages go through phases and that if I just endured a little longer, things would get better. But deep down in the part of me I tried hardest to ignore, I knew the truth. The storm inside our home was only getting stronger, and the more it grew, the more dangerous it became. The first unmistakable sign that something was wrong with Robert, something deeper than stress or exhaustion, came wrapped in a faint scent of perfume that did not belong anywhere in our home. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished packing Lila's school lunch for the next day when Robert walked through the door. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a sharp floral fragrance clinging to him, the kind that lingered too long to be an accidental transfer from a random person passing by. I noticed it the moment he leaned down to pick up Lila, who ran into his arms the second he appeared. The smell hit me like a physical shove. I asked gently if he had gone somewhere after work. He barely looked at me when he said he had attended a meeting that ran late. His tone was clipped, as if my question itself was unnecessary. I wanted to believe him, but the unease inside me grew roots. Over the next weeks, more things began to shift. Robert started leaving earlier in the mornings, claiming he needed to get ahead of the market reports. He started dressing differently, too. He swapped his usual navy suits for more stylish ones, lighter fabrics, modern cuts, and he began wearing a new cologne, warm and musky, nothing like the clean scent he had worn our entire marriage. When I complimented the change, hoping for a moment of connection, he glanced at me with an expression that almost looked annoyed, telling me I never noticed anything before. His phone became an extension of his hand. He kept it face down on the counter, took it into the bathroom, and angled the screen away whenever I walked near. He began stepping into the garage to take calls, closing the door behind him, pretending he was checking the water heater or adjusting the tools on the wall. I tried telling myself it was work. After all, financial advisors often had odd hours and demanding clients. But the feeling that something was unraveling grew sharper each day. One evening, as I gathered laundry from the hamper, his phone buzzed on the dresser. The screen lit up with a name I did not recognize, just two initials followed by a period. E.W. The message preview was short. I had a great time today. When I asked him later who EW was, he did not hesitate, but his answer came too quickly, too practiced. He said she was a new client, a woman preparing to retire, someone who needed help reorganizing her portfolio. He said she was overly friendly and that I had nothing to worry about. The way he dismissed my concern so casually made my stomach twist. That night, long after he fell asleep, I lay awake replaying every detail in my mind. The perfume, the new suits, the secretive calls, the shift in his voice whenever he said he was working late. By the time the sun rose, exhaustion wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. Still, I forced myself to push those fears aside. I had lived through years of gaslighting, years of being told I was dramatic or unstable. I worried that confronting him would only make things worse. But the signs kept multiplying. He started skipping family dinners, claiming meetings ran over. He no longer watched shows with me in the evenings. He stopped attending Lila's school events, saying he had too much on his plate. The distance grew until it felt like we were living in parallel universes under the same roof. One night, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, he came home even later than usual. His shirt was wrinkled and his hair was slightly mussed, as if someone had run fingers through it. The scent of the same unfamiliar perfume clung to him again, stronger this time. I stared at him, waiting for him to look at me, to give me something, any hint of truth or connection. But he brushed past me with barely a glance, muttering something about a long day. The moment he entered the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt tears burn behind my eyes. I had spent so long trying to believe he was simply stressed or overwhelmed, but the evidence kept stacking against me. Yet part of me, the part he had slowly reshaped over years of manipulation, whispered that questioning him made me seem paranoid, that confronting him would prove his claims that I was unstable. That night, Lila crawled into my lap while I sat in the living room staring blankly at the muted television. She looked up at me with those wide hazel eyes and asked if Daddy still liked our family. Her small voice shook something loose inside me. My throat tightened as I pulled her close and told her Daddy loved her very much. I told her everything was okay, even though nothing felt okay anymore. Emotional undulation dragged me back and forth between hope and suspicion, between wanting to believe the best and fearing the worst. But the truth was already there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to break open. I just did not know yet how catastrophic it would become, or how deeply that truth would reshape the rest of my life. The day the envelope arrived did not feel like the kind of day a life should fall apart. It was strangely peaceful outside, with a soft autumn breeze carrying the smell of damp leaves through the open kitchen window. I had just returned from picking up Lila from school, and she was sitting at the dining table drawing a picture of a pumpkin patch her class had visited. Her small hand moved confidently across the page, orange crayon smudging onto her fingers. I remember thinking how innocent she looked, how safe she believed her world was. Then the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a neighbor or a package for Robert, so I opened the door without much thought. A UPS driver stood on the porch holding a thick, flat envelope. He checked his handheld scanner and said in a routine tone, "I have a delivery for Madeline Foster, signature required." I felt a ripple of confusion. I had not ordered anything. I signed anyway, thanked him, closed the door, and looked down at the envelope. The return address was not a store or a friend or a school. It was a law firm. My heartbeat stuttered. I tore the seal open with trembling fingers and pulled out a stack of papers so heavy it felt like it could crush my chest. The first line blurred as soon as I read it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My breath left me in one violent exhale, and the room tilted slightly. For a moment, I thought I might faint. My hands shook so badly the papers nearly slipped from my grip. I forced myself to keep reading. The petitioner was Robert Hale. The respondent was me. The language was clinical and sharp, filled with accusations that seemed pulled from a stranger's life, not mine. He claimed I was emotionally unstable, unpredictable, and incapable of providing a healthy environment for Lila. He requested sole custody, the house, the car, and 70% of our assets. He wanted me out of the home within 30 days. A ringing noise echoed in my ears like a high-pitched hum that made everything else distant. I sank onto the couch, clutching the papers to my chest, as if they could somehow stop the shaking inside me. Lila looked up from her drawing and asked what the envelope was. I forced a smile so tight it hurt my cheeks and told her it was something boring for grown-ups. She believed me without question. When the front door opened 2 hours later, I had not moved from the couch. Robert walked in casually, tossing his keys onto the table, acting as though nothing in the world had changed. I stood up, papers trembling in my hand, and asked why I had received divorce documents without a single conversation, without even a hint. He looked at me with an emptiness so cold it sent a chill through me. He said, "This is what is best for Lila." He said it as if the sentence carried no consequence, as if he were announcing a business decision rather than detonating our family. I begged him to explain. I asked what I had done. His face never softened. He claimed I was too emotional, that I made him walk on eggshells, that Lila deserved a stable parent. I told him he was lying. He tilted his head slowly and asked me if I was sure I wanted to use that word because people who lie to themselves often cause the greatest damage. His voice was calm, deliberate, surgical. Then he told me he would be staying in a hotel for a few days and that I should take this time to reflect. Reflect on what I had become, he said. He packed a small bag, kissed Lila on the head with a practiced smile, and walked out without a backward glance. The moment the door clicked shut, something inside me collapsed. I slid to the floor and pressed my forehead against my knees, trying to breathe through the crushing weight in my chest. Hours later, long after Lila fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, reading each page of the petition over and over until the words blurred together. Every accusation felt like a blade. Every request felt like a verdict. The next morning, before I could figure out what to do, an email notification pinged on my phone. It was from Robert. The message was short, cold, and final. "This is the healthiest path forward. I hope you will cooperate for Lila's sake." It did not even sound like him anymore. It sounded like a scripted message drafted by someone who had already reshaped himself into the victim. My hands trembled as I closed the email. I looked around our home at the framed photos on the wall, at the toys scattered across the rug, at the life I had poured everything into. And for the first time, I realized Robert had not just left the marriage. He had declared war. I just did not know yet how far he was willing to go, or how tightly he had already woven the trap around me. Robert's family had always been difficult, but until the divorce papers arrived, I never understood how deeply their disdain for me ran. His mother, Patricia Hale, belonged to a specific category of suburban matriarchs who believed money was the measure of worth and that appearances were the closest thing to morality. She wore tailored sweaters even in the summer, carried herself like she was gliding rather than walking, and never spoke a sentence without implying she knew better than everyone else in the room. In the early years of our marriage, she covered her judgments with polite smiles and backhanded compliments. I used to brush them off, telling myself she would warm up eventually. But once the divorce was in motion, she dropped the mask without hesitation. She arrived at our house the very next day, unannounced, as if she had been waiting for an excuse to reclaim control over her son's life. I opened the door and found her standing stiffly on the porch, clutching her purse, like she was preparing to enter a contaminated zone. She did not hug me or smile. She pushed past me into the foyer, scanning the house with a critical eye. Her expression shifted into something almost triumphant when she spotted a few toys on the living room floor. She said, "This is exactly what we were worried about." I asked who she meant by we, but she ignored the question and began lecturing me about the responsibilities of motherhood, as if she had raised Lila herself. She said Robert had always been too patient with me. She said I had been given every opportunity to improve but had not. The more she spoke, the more it felt like she had rehearsed every line long before the divorce petition was drafted. Then she pulled out a folder. Inside were affidavits she and Robert's sister had signed, claiming I frequently neglected. Lila left the house in disarray and created an unhealthy emotional environment. I stared at the papers in disbelief. None of it was true. I asked how they could possibly write such lies under oath. Patricia smiled, a thin, sharp smile that made her look almost satisfied. She said families do what they must to protect children, especially from women who cannot handle the demands of motherhood. Her voice was controlled, as if she were discussing weather patterns instead of accusing me of being unfit to raise my own daughter. Something inside me began to shake. I told her to leave. She did not move. Instead, she glanced around to the living room and pointed at the laundry basket near the couch. She said, "This is why Robert is fighting for custody. This is why he deserves it." I told her again to leave. She lifted her chin and said, "You should be grateful he is being generous. He could have thrown you out already." That sentence knocked the breath from my lungs. I felt like a child being scolded small and insignificant, even though this was my home, my life, my daughter. Patricia finally left when Lila came downstairs, rubbing her eyes, tugging her blanket behind her. Patricia plastered on a sugary smile and told her she would visit again soon. When the door closed behind her, I sank into a chair and tried to steady my breathing. I thought it was over, but the interference only escalated from there. Patricia began calling Robert constantly, urging him to act quickly to secure custody before a judge had time to consider my side. She sent him articles about emotionally unstable mothers and forwarded him contact information for attorneys known for being ruthless in custody battles. She posted passive-aggressive quotes online about protecting children from toxic people. She showed up to Lila's school unannounced and tried to talk to her teacher. When the teacher refused to discuss family matters, Patricia told her that she hoped the school would understand if Robert had to take legal steps soon. That same day, Robert's sister Amanda messaged me long paragraphs about how I had failed the family, about how Robert deserved someone supportive and accomplished. She claimed Lila would be better off in a structured home. She said I was too fragile for motherhood. Too fragile. As if surviving years of cruelty, manipulation, and fear somehow made me weak rather than unimaginably strong. Each message, each visit, each lie they spread chipped away at my sense of reality. They made me feel surrounded, outnumbered, trapped in a narrative I had no control over. One evening, I overheard Patricia on speakerphone telling Robert that judges always sided with the parent who had financial stability and emotional strength. She said I had neither. Robert agreed. He agreed so calmly, so casually, it felt like being erased in real time. I stood in the hallway, listening frozen while he told his mother he had everything under control, that soon he would have full custody and everything would be behind them. He spoke as if Lila and I were burdens he was planning to discard. As the pressure from his family intensified, something else inside me began to shift. A spark of defiance muted for years flickered again. I realized they were not simply fighting for custody, they were trying to erase me, completely. And the only thing I knew for certain was that I could not let that happen. The financial collapse did not hit me all at once. It arrived in small shocks like electrical pulses traveling through wires I did not know existed until they sparked under my feet. It began the morning I logged into our joint checking account to pay the electricity bill. Instead of the usual balance we kept for monthly expenses, the screen displayed a number so low it took my brain several seconds to process it. $0, not low, not reduced, fully emptied. I blinked, refreshed, the page refreshed it again, then again, my stomach dropping further each time. At first, I thought it had to be an error. Banks made mistakes sometimes. Systems glitched. But when I clicked through to the transaction history, the truth sharpened into focus, like a knife pressed against glass. The withdrawals had all been made by Robert, not over time, not gradually, all at once. A series of transfers to an external account created under his name, executed the night before he walked out of the house. My hands trembled as I scrolled. He had timed everything perfectly, knowing exactly when I paid bills, knowing exactly how much remained in the account, and knowing there was no restraining order yet that would have prevented him from draining it. My heart hammered as I tried our savings next. The screen loaded slowly, painfully, each spinning second amplifying my fear. When it finally displayed, another blow landed. The balance had been cut nearly in half, moved into an investment account I did not have access to. Then I checked the credit card under my name, the one I used mostly for groceries and school supplies for my students. I stared in disbelief as I saw charges I had not made. Luxury clothing stores, a high-end restaurant in downtown Columbus, a hotel, all from the past month, all from the card Robert used whenever he claimed he needed to run errands or pick up something on his way home from work. Each purchase carried the weight of a cruel intention. It was not enough for him to drain our finances. He needed a trail that made me look irresponsible, disorganized, and financially reckless. Exactly the kind of parent who could not manage household stability in a custody battle. I sank into a kitchen chair, the cold metal pressing into my spine as dread wrapped around me like a vice. I tried calling the bank, explaining shakily that I had not authorized any of the transactions. But without a court order and with his name on the accounts, they said there was nothing they could do yet. Their voices were polite, sympathetic even, but the answer was the same each time. Without legal intervention, Robert had every right to move the money. I hung up feeling dizzy, my palms slick with sweat. Financial abuse was something I had read about in pamphlets at the doctor's office, or seen mentioned on posters in women's restrooms, the kind printed in soft colors with tiny hotline numbers no one paid attention to until it became relevant. I never imagined I would be one of the women those pamphlets were written for. As if the financial sabotage was not enough, small but strategic disruptions began appearing throughout the house. One afternoon when I opened the pantry to start dinner, several empty wine bottles rolled out onto the floor. I froze, staring at them. They had not been there before. I rarely drank at all, and certainly not alone. When I picked one up, I noticed something odd. The label was smudged as if someone had handled it with damp fingers. My heart pounded as an awful possibility formed. Later that week, during a home visit required for the custody investigation, the evaluator noted the clutter in the living room, specifically the scattered laundry basket and overturned toy bin. I tried explaining that it had not been like that earlier, that I had cleaned the house the night before, but the evaluator made a note anyway, nodding with a sympathetic but distant expression. After she left, I searched the house room by room, my breath quickening, as if danger lurked behind the furniture. In the laundry room behind the washer, I found a pair of dirty men's socks shoved under a pile of towels. In the garage, I found a fast food bag Robert must have dumped out on purpose, its contents scattered across the floor. The message was clear. He had been coming back to the house when I was gone. He still had a key, and he was creating scenes to paint me as careless, overwhelmed, incapable of maintaining a healthy home for Lila. The realization made my knees weaken. I sat on the cold concrete of the garage floor, folding my arms tightly around myself as panic crawled along my skin. He was building a case against me long before the divorce petition arrived. Every insult, every accusation, every carefully executed lie had been part of a methodical plan to erase me not just emotionally, but legally and financially. That night, after putting Lila to bed, I sat in the dark living room and stared at the glowing streetlight outside the window. I thought about all the years I told myself things would get better. I thought about the hope that came and went like flickering candlelight. I thought about how naive I had been to assume cruelty always announced itself loudly. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it smiled, sometimes it wore a wedding ring. And as the house settled around me, creaking softly in the quiet night, I realized I was no longer just fighting to save my marriage. I was fighting to save my daughter, my home, my future, my identity. I just did not know yet that help was already on its way in the form of someone who had always been my mirror, my anchor, and my fiercest defender. My twin sister was about to walk back into my life in a way that would change everything. Marissa showed up on my doorstep 3 days after the financial collapse, though she later told me she had bought her plane ticket the moment she heard the strain in my voice during a brief phone call earlier that week. She did not announce her arrival. She simply rang the doorbell at 7 in the morning while I was packing Lila's lunchbox, and when I opened the door, my twin sister stood there with a suitcase in one hand and a fierce, worried look on her face. Seeing her felt like inhaling oxygen after days of drowning. We were identical in almost every way growing up, but adulthood had shaped us differently. She had moved to Colorado after college, built a career in aviation logistics, became sharper, more decisive, more willing to confront trouble head-on. I had always been the gentler one, the one who believed people changed when given enough compassion. When she stepped inside and hugged me, Her arms wrapped tight around my shoulders. I felt myself break in a way I had been resisting for months. She pulled back slowly and looked at me with eyes that took in everything at once. The exhaustion, the fear, the fading spark I tried desperately to keep alive. She said, "Something is wrong. Tell me everything." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The more I tried to push them out, the more my chest tightened. Eventually, she guided me to the couch, sat beside me, and waited silently with her hand on my back. It took time, but the story came pouring out in fragments. The financial sabotage, the staged messes, the empty bank accounts, the late-night emails, the luxury charges on my credit card, the wine bottles planted to make me look unstable, the custody threats. Every detail spilled out of me like water breaking through a dam. By the time I finished, I was shaking again. Marissa leaned back slowly, her expression darkening in a way I had not seen since we were teenagers, and she caught a group of older boys cornering me near the bleachers. She did not speak at first. Her jaw tightened, her hands curled into fists. Finally, she said, "His behavior is calculated. This is not stress. This is strategy. He wants full control." I wiped my face and nodded because I had known that deep down, but had been too afraid to admit it. She asked to see my wrist. I hesitated out of instinct, but she reached for my sleeve and gently pushed it up. The faint ring of bruising was still there, yellowing at the edges. Her eyes went cold. She whispered, "He did this." I whispered back that it was not that bad. She turned to me sharply and said, "Do not minimize what he has done." That sentence sank into me with surprising force. I had never heard someone say it so plainly, without hesitation, without doubt. She asked how long this had been happening. I pressed a hand over my mouth, ashamed of the answer. "Years," I whispered through trembling fingers. Her eyes softened with grief, but also ignited with something else: resolve. That afternoon, while Lila napped, Marissa walked through the house, silently observing everything with the sharpness of someone assembling a puzzle. She noticed the random clutter, the things out of place, the inconsistencies that no stranger would catch. She asked whether I had records of Robert's withdrawals. I told her the bank statements were online. She spent an hour printing everything, highlighting transactions, creating a timeline. She did it calmly, methodically, the same way she used to approach complicated math problems as kids. At one point, she asked if Robert still had a key to the house. I froze because I had not considered changing the locks. She closed her eyes as if fighting the urge to shout. Then she said quietly, "He is coming back here when you are not home." I said I suspected that too. She asked if I had a doorbell camera. I shook my head. She exhaled sharply, grabbed her keys, and said, "We are getting one today." We drove to the store, bought a Ring camera along with 2 extra cameras for the garage and backyard, and installed them within an hour of returning home. Marissa handled everything: climbing ladders, syncing devices, checking angles, ensuring the microphones picked up sound clearly. While she worked, she kept muttering, "He has been staging scenes. He has been building a narrative. He is trying to erase you." I stood beside her in the hallway and finally allowed myself to say the truth aloud. I said, "I am scared." She stopped, turned toward me, and placed both hands on my shoulders. Her voice softened. "You are not alone anymore. I am here, and I am not leaving until this ends." That night, after we tucked Lila into bed, we reviewed the footage from the cameras we had just installed. There was nothing unusual yet, but the sight of those wide-angle shots showing the porch, the driveway, and the backyard gave me a strange sense of safety I had not felt in years. When the house finally quieted down, Marissa sat across from me on the living room rug and asked a question I had been terrified to confront. She said, "Do you still love him?" I stared at the flickering lamp, searching for something true to hold on to. After a long moment, I whispered, "I do not know what I loved anymore." She nodded with understanding, not judgment. Then she said something that would become the turning point of everything that followed. "We are going to find the truth. And when we do, he will not get away with this." I believed her. For the first time in months, maybe years, hope did not feel like a fantasy. It felt like a possibility. Marissa's determination took on a life of its own the day she installed the cameras. She approached the situation the way she approached any crisis in her aviation logistics job, with sharp focus and a refusal to let uncertainty win. Once the Ring doorbell camera and the 2 additional cameras in the garage and backyard were fully synced to her phone, she tested every angle twice, then 3 times, making sure the motion detection was sensitive enough to catch a squirrel sneezing if it had to. I stood behind her while she adjusted settings with rapid precision, the glow from the phone reflecting off her concentrated expression. She said, "If he has been coming back, we will know." After she finished, we sat together at the dining table surrounded by printouts of bank statements, credit card charges, custody paperwork, and the divorce petition. It looked like we were preparing for trial, even though I still felt too fragile to imagine stepping foot in a courtroom again. Marissa kept asking questions. Had I ever seen Robert talking to someone in the car outside our home? Had he ever changed his work schedule suddenly? Had he installed any apps I did not recognize? Had he ever insisted on handling all mail? The more she asked, the more pieces of a larger, darker truth began to form. I told her about the perfume, the secretive calls in the garage, the initials E.W. She frowned, grabbed her laptop, and began typing fast. Within minutes, she found the online staff page of Robert's workplace. There she was, Emily Ward, Director of Human Resources, polished, blonde, smiling brightly in her professional portrait, the same initials from the text message. Marissa stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it toward me. I felt something inside me collapse and harden at the same time. She asked, "Do you think they are involved?" My throat tightened so painfully I could barely speak. I whispered yes, but I never expected what the camera would reveal. It was 3 days after installation when Marissa nudged me awake at 6 in the morning, her phone already in her hand. Her voice was urgent but steady. "Maddie, you need to see this." My heart lurched as she handed me her phone. The screen displayed the Ring camera feed from the night before. At 2:30 in the morning, long after I had put Lila to bed and fallen asleep, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Robert. He stepped out quietly, looking around as if checking for movement. He still had a key. He approached the door, unlocked it with practiced ease, and entered. The timestamp showed he stayed inside for 6 minutes. When he emerged, he carried nothing with him but looked disturbingly calm, glancing back at the house with a smug expression before getting into his car and driving away. My breath hitched. Marissa swiped to the next clip. In the garage camera at 2:36 a.m., we watched as Emily Ward stepped out of the passenger side of Robert's car. She did not get out earlier. She waited until he entered the house. She paced near the garage door, arms crossed, clearly frustrated. We could not hear her words, but her lips moved fast, her gestures sharp. When Robert returned to the garage, they began arguing in low tones. Marissa increased the audio and faint fragments came through. "Emily said you are running out of time." Robert replied, "She will break soon. Just keep pushing." Emily said if she does not snap before the next hearing, this will get messy. My body went cold. The backyard camera captured the rest. They moved behind the house, far enough away from the street to feel hidden. The audio was faint, but clear enough to catch the damning lines. "Emily said the evaluator needs to see her unstable. Robert said she already looks frantic half the time. She cannot keep herself together. We just have to make sure it shows." Emily asked about custody. He answered, "Once I get full rights, we can move forward." She asked, "Move forward how?" He smirked and said, "You know how." She reached out and touched his arm. Silent, familiar, intimate. I felt sick. Then came the line that made Marissa curse under her breath. "Robert said the Ring camera will not catch us in the backyard." It was said with such confidence, such pride. He did not know we had installed new cameras. He did not know the entire conversation was recorded. He did not know the mask he had worn for years had finally cracked. When the clips ended, I set Marissa's phone on the table with trembling hands. My entire world felt like it had tilted onto its side. Every doubt, every fear, every suspicion that I had buried under years of self-blame suddenly came roaring back with horrifying clarity. I had not been paranoid. I had not imagined things. I had not overreacted. He was manipulating me. He was staging evidence. He was planning to tear my daughter from me. and he was not doing it alone. Marissa stood pacing the living room with restless fury. She said he has been laying groundwork for months. He probably started long before you even noticed. She turned toward me, her expression softening. But he made a mistake. He thought he was smarter than you. He thought he was smarter than us. She paused. He was wrong. I felt my breath shake as I sank onto the couch. The truth was devastating, but there was also something else beneath the shock. A spark. The faintest flicker of strength that had been buried under years of fear. For the first time since the divorce began, I felt the possibility of fighting back. Not just surviving, fighting. Marissa sat beside me, took my hand, and said, "We are taking this to your attorney. And when this reaches the courtroom, everything changes." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. I am ready. I did not know then just how explosive that video would become. But I knew this. Robert had built his case on lies. And now, finally, the truth had teeth. The first custody hearing arrived faster than I expected, and despite everything Marissa and I had uncovered, I walked into that courtroom feeling like a woman, walking into a storm without an umbrella. The Franklin County Domestic Relations Court felt colder than usual that morning, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead as if even the electricity sensed the tension in the air. My attorney, Denise Harper, a sharp but compassionate woman who had handled dozens of messy custody battles, met me at the door and handed me a stack of organized notes. She said, "Stay calm, answer carefully, and do not let his attorney rattle you." Her tone was steady, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She knew cases like mine often went sideways even with evidence. Robert arrived minutes later wearing a charcoal suit and an expression of calculated sorrow, the kind he used when he wanted strangers to think he was carrying the weight of the world. His attorney, a slick man named Thomas Keene, walked beside him, flipping confidently through a binder filled with so many color-coded tabs, it looked like a textbook for manipulation. When we entered the courtroom, the judge from the first hearing sat at the bench, glasses perched low on his nose, as he skimmed documents already laid before him. My palms were slick with sweat. My throat felt tight. Denise whispered, "You have done nothing wrong," but fear still clung to me like a second skin. The hearing began with Robert's attorney presenting what he called behavioral evidence. He played the same video of me crying on the bedroom floor, the same one edited to erase any context of Robert's intimidation. On the monitor, my face appeared blotchy and distressed, my voice trembling. Keene paused the video at the exact moment I raised my voice, freezing the frame to make me look unhinged. He said, "This is clear emotional instability. This is a pattern." He paced slowly while speaking, projecting confidence as if he had already won. He then introduced their expert witness, a man who called himself a parenting coach, but held no license, no psychology degree, nothing beyond a certificate from an online course. His name was Martin Caldwell, and he strode up to the stand wearing a smile that seemed almost rehearsed. He spoke with an air of authority, claiming he had assessed documents, text messages, and statements provided by Robert. He said I displayed signs of emotional volatility and potential parental unfitness. He said my reactions suggested a risk of inconsistent caregiving. My jaw clenched. Denise objected, citing his lack of credentials, but the judge allowed his testimony with the explanation that parenting coaches could still offer observations under Ohio law. The words hit me like blows. Each sentence twisted the truth into something unrecognizable. Every time Caldwell said instability, my heart sank another inch. Every time he mentioned emotional volatility, I felt the judge's eyes shift slightly toward me, measuring me against a narrative built by someone who had never even spoken to me. Then came the photographs, the staged messes, the planted wine bottles, the disorganized rooms Robert had carefully orchestrated during his secret visits. Keene held them up one by one like trophies. Here is evidence of poor housekeeping. Here is lack of structure. Here is potential substance misuse. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not from embarrassment, but from fury I was not allowed to show. If I cried, they would call me unstable. If I raised my voice, they would call me aggressive. If I said nothing, they would call me evasive. It felt like standing on a tightrope above a canyon, the slightest misstep ready to send me falling. Denise argued back with everything she had. She pointed out the suspicious timing of the photos, the lack of foundation for Caldwell's psychological analysis, the limitations of edited video. But Robert's attorney countered each point, smoothly weaving storylines that made me seem chaotic and made Robert appear patient and concerned. And the judge listened. I could feel his skepticism building with each passing minute. Robert played his part flawlessly. When he took the stand, he spoke softly, shoulders slumped, voice heavy with false regret. He said he wished he did not have to be here. He said he wanted peace. He said he hoped I received the help I clearly needed. He even dabbed at the corners of his eyes with a tissue at one point, and I watched the judge nod sympathetically. My stomach twisted. I barely recognized the man speaking. He looked like Robert. He sounded like Robert. But the version of him on that stand was a character carefully crafted for the courtroom, stripped of the cruelty and manipulation he reserved only for me. When it was my turn to testify, I felt my body go cold. Denise squeezed my hand before I stood. I swore to tell the truth and sat down, trying to steady the shaking in my voice. I answered every question carefully, honestly, explaining that the video had been recorded after an argument, that the photos did not reflect the real state of my home, that Robert's narrative was built on manipulation. But each time I defended myself. Keene twisted my words, asking if I was blaming Robert for my emotional reactions, implying I was deflecting responsibility. At one point, he asked, "Do you consider yourself a stable person, Ms. Foster?" I hesitated for half a second, and he smiled like he had caught something damning. When the hearing neared its end, the judge leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. His expression was thoughtful, reserved, but there was something in his voice that made my chest tighten. He said, "Based on the evidence presented today, the court has concerns regarding the respondent's emotional consistency." The room tilted, my vision blurred. I gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. He was leaning toward Robert. He was believing the lies. I felt myself breaking. Denise whispered, "Hold on, just hold on," but her voice sounded distant. The judge continued speaking, but I barely heard anything after the phrase temporary custody. The tone of defeat washed through me. For a moment, it felt like the world was ending. I thought of Lila, her laugh, her drawings, her warm hand in mine. And then, for the first time since walking into the courtroom, something inside me flickered, not hope, not yet, but the faint sense that the fight was not over, not even close. I just did not know the turning point was already waiting in the shadows. Evidence always reveals itself at the moment you least expect, and in my case, it happened on a quiet Sunday morning while Marissa and I were cleaning the garage. We had just finished checking the ring footage again, scanning for any sign of Robert returning, when Marissa suddenly stopped mid-step and stared at a stack of boxes near the back wall. Something in her expression shifted from casual frustration to razor-sharp focus. She walked over, crouched down, and pulled out a dusty cardboard box I had not touched in years. It had been shoved behind the Christmas decorations, behind a heavy plastic tote filled with old baby clothes, tucked in a place that did not make sense unless someone had moved it intentionally. She looked back at me and asked, "When did you last go through this?" I told her I had no idea what was even in the box. She opened it slowly, sifting through old chargers, a torn winter scarf, and a collection of mismatched tools. Then she froze. Her hand reached into the bottom corner and pulled out a phone. Not just any phone. Robert's old phone. The one he had replaced 2 years ago when he said it stopped holding a charge. The screen was cracked spiderweb fractures running across the glass like frozen lightning. Marissa turned it over, pressed the power button, and to both our shock, the screen lit up with a faint glow. No passcode prompt, no security lock, just the home screen. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. Why would he hide this in the garage? Why would he keep it at all? Marissa's instincts kicked in immediately. She told me to sit down, her voice firm but calm, almost like she was afraid my legs might give out. She navigated through the phone quickly, ignoring messages and focusing on the camera roll. Most of the thumbnails looked ordinary at first glance. pictures of Lila at the park, photos from our anniversary years ago, a snapshot of a holiday dinner. Then the images changed. My stomach flipped when I saw the folder titled Drafts. Marissa opened it. Inside were short video clips. Some only a few seconds long, others longer. She played the first one. It was Robert sitting in his car at night bragging to someone on the phone about making me snap during arguments. He laughed a laugh so casual it made my skin crawl. He said she always falls for it. All I have to do is push the right buttons. The second video was worse. He was in what looked like his office talking to Emily. Her voice was quiet, but the phone picked up enough. She said, "You need her to break down in front of the judge. She needs to look unstable." He agreed, saying she is already halfway there. The third video made me gasp. It was taken inside our living room. I recognized the date by the decorations in the background. It was a night I remembered clearly because I had cried myself to sleep after another argument. In the clip, Robert adjusted the camera angle on his phone, making sure the messy background was in frame. Then he set it down, walked into the kitchen, grabbed a wine bottle, and placed it on the coffee table. He positioned the laundry basket in a way that made it seem neglected. Then he started recording, intending to catch me in a breakdown later. I pressed both hands over my mouth as the memories of that night came crashing back. I had thought the house looked a little messy. I thought I was losing control. I thought I was failing. But he had staged all of it. He had constructed the chaos and then filmed me blaming myself for it. The self-loathing I had carried for years suddenly felt like poison someone else had poured down my throat. The fourth video was the one that changed everything. It was another recording between him and Emily, but this one took place in the car. They were parked somewhere dark. The dashboard lights illuminated their faces enough to see their expressions. Emily asked, "Are you sure this is going to work?" He smirked and said, "Once I have full custody, we will be free." She smiled back, touching his arm the same way she had in the backyard footage. Then he added the line that made me feel like the world had tilted sideways. "She's a scared little bird. One push and she cracks." Marissa stopped the video and stared at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My entire body felt numb, like electricity had surged through me and short-circuited everything. It was proof. Raw, undeniable, damning proof. But it still was not enough by itself. Not yet. Marissa said we need more. Something that shows intent. Something that ties it directly to custody. She started digging through the phone again, opening apps, checking notes, scrolling through files. She looked like someone piecing together the final edge of a puzzle. Then she found it. A voice memo dated 5 weeks before the divorce papers were delivered. She tapped play. Robert's voice filled the garage. He said, "When we get to court, make sure you stick to the story. She needs to look unstable." Emily responded with, "I know, but what if she holds herself together?" He answered, "Do not worry. She will not. We will push her over the edge, and if she does not break at the first hearing, we will try again." My mouth went dry. My vision blurred. I had spent months believing I was falling apart because something was wrong with me, that I was weak, that I was failing as a mother and a woman. But it had been engineered, manufactured, orchestrated. Marissa ended the memo and set the phone down gently on the workbench, as if touching it too hard might shatter the last ounce of rational thought holding me together. She said, "You are not imagining things. You never were." He planned everything, every bruise, every accusation, every setup, everything. I felt tears rising, but these were not the kind of tears that came from confusion or hopelessness. They came from clarity. They came from rage, waking up after years of being smothered. They came from the realization that the narrative he used to trap me was finally cracking wide open. For the first time in a long time, something inside me shifted. Not fear. Strength. Quiet, steady, dangerous strength. I whispered, "What do we do now?" Marissa looked at me with a fierce, unshakable expression. "We take this to your attorney, and then we save your daughter." I nodded, feeling the beginning of a fire inside me that had been extinguished far too long. The first hearing had nearly broken me, but the next one would break him. Children always know more than adults think. Even when they do not fully understand the details, They feel the heaviness in the air, the shift in tones, the fear hiding beneath the surface. Lila had been quieter for weeks, her drawings filled with small figures standing far apart from each other instead of the colorful family portraits she used to love making. I told myself she was just adjusting to the tension in the house, but deep down, I knew she had seen more than I realized. The moment she finally spoke, the truth happened on a rainy afternoon when the sky hung low and gray over our neighborhood. Marissa had taken a break from sorting evidence sitting on the couch with her laptop while I helped Lila with a school project. We were cutting construction paper into shapes when Lila suddenly set her scissors down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Her voice was small, fragile. "Mommy, can I tell you something?" My heart tightened because of how she said it, as if she had been holding the words in for too long and was scared to let them out. I smiled gently and told her, of course. "You can tell me anything." She twisted her hands in her lap, eyes shiny with uncertainty. "Daddy told me to say something at the meeting." I froze. What meeting? She meant the custody evaluator. She meant the school counselor. She meant every adult who had asked her gentle questions in soft tones over the past few weeks. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "What did Daddy tell you to say?" She swallowed hard. "He said I should tell them you scare me." My chest constricted so sharply I felt dizzy. I whispered, "But why, sweetheart? You know I would never scare you." She nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I know, Mommy. You never scare me. Daddy scares me. He yells at you and locks you outside and throws things. He told me I had to say it so you would get help." Tears blurred my vision as I reached for her, pulling her gently into my arms. She buried her face in my shirt, her small body trembling. I felt her fear like it was woven directly into my skin. That moment shattered something in me. Hearing her say it out loud made everything real in a way evidence alone never could. It was no longer just my pain, my confusion, my humiliation. It was hers. My sister looked up from the couch, her eyes filling with fury as she listened. She closed her laptop slowly, like she was trying to control her breathing. When Lila pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, Marissa moved closer and sat on the floor beside us. Her voice was soft when she asked, "Did Daddy tell you anything else?" Lila nodded. "He said to say Mommy cries a lot and forgets things. He said to say you get mad and break stuff, but you never do that, Mommy." "You never. You just cry when he's loud." My throat felt raw, like every word scraped against something inside me. I stroked her hair, whispering, "Thank you for telling me." "You are so brave." She leaned her forehead against mine and whispered, "I do not want Daddy to be mad anymore. I want him to stop." I held her tighter, feeling my entire world tilt around that sentence. The truth was no longer hiding. She had lived it. She had felt it. She had been dragged into the storm he created, forced to carry secrets no child should ever carry. Marissa lifted her chin, slowly. Her jaw clenched, her eyes, burning with a mix of heartbreak and resolve. She said, "This changes everything." And it did. Every legal case involving custody relied on one central question: what environment protects the child? Lila's words were not just emotional revelations. They were evidence of coercion, evidence of manipulation, evidence of psychological harm, evidence that Robert's obsession with control extended to our daughter. After we calmed Lila down and set her up with a movie in the bedroom, Marissa pulled me into the kitchen. She said we need to document this immediately. Record your memory of the conversation. Write down every detail. And we should talk to your attorney before the next hearing. I nodded, wiping tears from my cheeks. My hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from urgency, from a gathering strength. Marissa grabbed her notebook, handed me a pen, and pushed gently but firmly until I started writing. As I wrote, I realized something. All this time, I had been fighting alone, drowning in self-doubt while Robert sharpened his lies. But now, I had my twin sister, the cameras, the phone, and my daughter's truth. And for the first time, the narrative was shifting. Robert had built his case on the assumption that I would break, that I would collapse under pressure, that fear would silence me. But instead, he had pushed me into clarity, into resolve, into the fierce, instinctive part of motherhood that rises only when a child is threatened. I looked up from the paper meeting Marissa's eyes. She already knew what I was thinking. Her voice was steady when she said, "He is not winning this. Not anymore." And she was right. This was no longer just a custody battle. It was a fight for my daughter's safety, for her innocence, for her right to grow up free from manipulation and fear. And I knew now without any hesitation that I would burn down every lie Robert built before I ever let him take her from me. The house felt different after Lila revealed the truth. The walls that once echoed with fear now hummed with a quiet determination, as if the air itself understood that something had shifted. Marissa spent the next morning pacing along the kitchen counter, phone in hand, notebook open, cross-checking legal procedures while muttering to herself. She had always been the strategic one between us, the one who could turn emotional chaos into a precise line of action. I sat at the dining table staring at the Ring camera videos and the recovered footage from Robert's old phone. Every time I heard his voice bragging or Emily's breathy laughter encouraging him, my stomach twisted. It was surreal to hear them plotting against me inside the home I once believed was safe. I kept thinking about Lila and how her innocent words had carried more truth than any adult testimony so far. My attorney called mid-morning. His voice was steady but urgent. He said what Lila told you is significant. If she was coached or pressured to lie, that is a form of emotional harm the court takes very seriously. But we need corroborating evidence, and we need it before the hearing. Marissa leaned over the speakerphone and asked what counts as corroborating. He replied, anything that shows intent on Robert's part. A recording, memo, text, video, anything that proves he planned to manipulate the narrative. I told him about the phone we found in the garage, how it played videos of Robert laughing with friends about triggering me. He sighed heavily but said those are helpful but not quite enough. They show his character, not the deliberate plan. We need something unmistakable, something that shows Robert and Emily coordinated the custody strategy, something that cannot be interpreted as dark humor or venting, something decisive. After we hung up, Marissa folded her arms and stared at the ceiling in deep thought. She looked like a detective piecing together a caseboard in her head. Then suddenly, her eyes widened. She snapped her fingers. Voice memos. Robert records everything. He always has. He dictates reminders, grocery lists, client notes, arguments, even excuses he would rehearse before talking to people. I blinked. I had forgotten about that habit. Before his personality changed, he used to record sweet messages to himself about vacations he wanted to plan for us or notes about things he wanted to fix around the house. But ever since he became colder, I avoided touching anything of his. Marissa marched straight to the box of things she had collected from the garage. Dusty tools, an old flashlight, and the cracked phone with its half-dead battery. She powered it on again and dug through the apps. Most files were corrupted, but the voice memo folder still opened. There were dozens of recordings. Some were short, muffled noises, likely accidental taps. Others were long and rambling with Robert venting about work. Marissa clicked through each one while I sat next to her with my heart lodged tight in my throat. 30 minutes passed. Nothing but frustration and bitterness from Robert. Then a voice memo with a timestamp from 2 weeks before the divorce papers arrived caught her attention. She tapped it. Emily's voice floated from the speaker. Calm, calculated. She said, "Remember, Robert, you have to make her break. She has to look unstable in front of the judge. Do not let her stay calm. Push her. She will crack." My hands shook. Marissa's eyebrows shot up. "Listen," Robert responded in the recording. Yeah, I know. I have rehearsed it. First. She cries easily. "I will use that. And remember, the coach will back us up no matter what," Emily replied. "Just stick to the story. This is the only way to get custody without a fight." My breath left my body in a harsh exhale. That is it. That is intent. This was not speculation, not interpretation, not accidental. It was a deliberate plan, a conspiracy, a strategy to weaponize my emotions against me. Marissa looked like she wanted to throw the phone through the wall, but instead she pressed her lips together and said, "We need multiple copies of this audio now." I nodded quickly. She airdropped it to her laptop to my phone and to an external drive. Then she emailed it securely to my attorney. While she worked, my mind drifted to Lila again. Her little voice saying, "Daddy told me to say Mommy scares me," replayed like a haunting melody. I felt the fierce pulse of maternal determination grip my chest again. This fight was no longer about proving I was a good mother. It was about dismantling the web Robert wove around my daughter. As evening approached, Marissa made coffee and laid everything out on the dining table. Ring camera clips, phone videos, screenshots, the new voice memo. She said the judge will not be able to ignore this. Not even if Robert tries to twist it. Not even if his attorney objects. This is their blueprint, their confession. Tomorrow, you walk into court with the truth. I nodded slowly. My hands were still trembling, but this time from adrenaline instead of fear. For the first time in months, I felt grounded, solid, not alone, not helpless. I looked at the pile of evidence that proved I had not imagined the abuse. I had not been overly sensitive. I had not been unstable. I had been targeted, strategically, cruelly, expertly, but now I had the power to expose it. Marissa squeezed my hand and whispered, "We are ready," and I believed her. The storm was far from over, but I no longer faced it alone. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Tomorrow would not be the end of a fight. It would be the beginning of justice. The courthouse looked even more intimidating the morning of the final hearing. Gray clouds hung low over Columbus, casting long shadows across the steps as Marissa and I approached the entrance. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs with every step, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had walked into this building terrified before, but today felt different. Today, I carried truth. My attorney met us outside the courtroom, his expression serious but energized. He said I reviewed the memo and the ring footage last night. This is exactly what we needed. It proves intent. It proves manipulation. It proves a coordinated plan. But listen carefully. The judge does not know any of this yet. We have to trust the timing. We cannot show it until the court allows it. I nodded, clutching the file Marissa had organized for me. My sister placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. She whispered, "Just breathe, Maddie. You are not walking in there alone." When we entered the courtroom, Robert was already seated at the petitioner's table, wearing a perfectly pressed navy suit and the same confident smirk he had worn since the first hearing. Emily was nowhere in sight, but I knew she would appear eventually, probably with that polished fake smile she wore like armor. Robert glanced at me, his eyes narrowing just slightly when he saw Marissa beside me. A flicker of unease crossed his face, but he quickly hid it behind his usual calm arrogance. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something that made Robert nod smugly. It was clear they believed the case was already won. The judge entered, and all conversations died instantly. He settled into his seat, adjusted his glasses, and spoke in a deep, authoritative voice. "We are here today to continue the matter of custody and marital dissolution between Robert Hale and Madeline Foster. At this time, the court is prepared to issue its ruling unless there is additional evidence from either side." My stomach tightened. This was exactly what Robert wanted, a swift ruling before the truth surfaced. His attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, the petitioner would like to proceed with final arguments. The evidence already presented clearly demonstrates Mrs. Foster's instability and inability to provide a consistent environment for the child. Maddie has shown emotional volatility in this courtroom, and we have expert support confirming these concerns." He gestured gracefully like a man confident he had already won. I shot a desperate glance at my attorney, waiting for him to stand. Instead, before he opened his mouth, the judge interrupted. "Before we proceed, I want to allow the testimony from the petitioner's expert parenting coach. Please step forward." My stomach churned. The coach, a middle-aged woman with a stiff blazer and overly rehearsed smile, walked to the witness stand. She raised her right hand, completed the oath, and sat down, adjusting her notes with exaggerated importance. She began listing her observations in a neutral, almost clinical tone. She claimed I showed signs of emotional instability, hypersensitivity, inconsistency in routine, and difficulty managing stress. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, fighting the urge to react. The coach continued speaking as if she were reading from a script. Every word was designed to paint me as fragile, unpredictable, unfit. When she finished, the courtroom felt heavier, as if the walls themselves leaned in. Robert's attorney rose again. Your Honor, given the expert testimony and the respondent's behavior throughout these proceedings, we believe sole custody with the father is not only appropriate but necessary. Robert nodded solemnly, as if this verdict would bring him deep sorrow. I felt my chest tighten painfully. The judge exhaled slowly, folded his hands, and said very well, I am prepared to issue my ruling. My heart dropped. My breath caught in my throat. I saw Marissa stiffen beside me, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. My attorney rose quickly. Your Honor, if I may, the respondent does have additional evidence that is crucial to the court's understanding of this case. Robert's attorney scoffed loudly. This is highly irregular. We are moments away from ruling. The judge raised a hand. Presented if it is truly relevant. Time is limited. My attorney nodded and turned to me. His voice was calm. Maddie, hand me the drive. I reached into the file Marissa had prepared and placed the small silver USB into his hand. Robert's expression changed instantly. His smirk vanished. His jaw stiffened. His knuckles whitened around the arm of his chair. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. The judge instructed the bailiff to bring the USB to the clerk. As the clerk began connecting it to the courtroom monitor, Robert suddenly rose halfway from his seat. Your Honor, I must object. This was not submitted previously. This is improper procedure. It is clearly an attempt to delay the ruling. The judge responded with a stern tone. If the evidence is fabricated or irrelevant, the court will disregard it. If it is material to the truth, the court will consider it. Sit down. Robert slowly lowered himself, but panic flickered clearly across his face. Marissa leaned toward me and whispered, He knows. He knows what is coming. My entire body trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of justice finally rising. The clerk clicked open the folder containing the crucial audio recordings and ring footage. The judge leaned forward, preparing to listen. My attorney stood tall, his voice steady. Your Honor, what you are about to hear directly contradicts the narrative presented by the petitioner and exposes a coordinated effort to manipulate the court, the child, and the respondent. The room fell impossibly still. The air itself felt suspended. The clerk pressed play. The audio began with a faint crackle from the courtroom speakers, followed by the unmistakable sound of car doors closing in a dim garage. The giant monitor flickered as the clipped ring footage synced with the audio, creating a chillingly clear scene. Robert's voice came first low and annoyed. Turn off the dome light. I do not want the camera catching anything. Then Emily's voice responded with irritation. Relax. You already checked the angles. No one is going to see us. The screen displayed the inside of Robert's car, parked near the far corner of the garage where the ring's night vision barely reached. Emily leaned across the center console, her silhouette faint but recognizable. Marissa stiffened beside me. The judge's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward in his chair. The courtroom stayed frozen, every breath held hostage by the tension leaking from the speakers. Then the words that changed everything rolled out slowly, clearly, unmistakably. Emily said she is fragile already. Just push her during the hearing, make her look hysterical. Mothers like her crack fast. Robert chuckled darkly. He said she always cries when she is confused. If she breaks even once in front of the judge, it will prove our case. Just stay calm and stick to our story. The coach will back us up. She is on our side. My attorney glanced at the judge, who sat unnervingly still, his expression becoming more severe by the second. Emily continued speaking in the recording, her tone smug. And after you get full custody, we can decide what to do next. She is not going to survive financially. She will crumble. You will look like the hero father, Robert added in a satisfied tone. I cannot wait for this to be over. Once the house is mine, we can move forward without her. We will get everything. Just keep playing the perfect concerned expert. She is too emotional to fight back. I felt my stomach twist at the venom in his voice. Marissa gripped my hand under the table, grounding me as the past months flashed through my head, every insult, every threat, every moment he made me doubt myself. The audio continued with Emily whispering something the microphone barely caught. She said she thinks we are helping her. That is the funny part. She will walk into court blind while we have already built the entire narrative. Robert laughed again, the same cold laugh I had heard during our worst arguments, only now everyone in the room heard it too. The screen then switched to a second file, the voice memo Marissa and I found on the old phone. This one was even clearer. There was no garage noise, no movement, just Robert's voice recorded as if he were practicing his lines. He said I will raise my voice slightly during cross-examination. Not too much, just enough to unsettle her. Make her flustered. If she starts crying, the judge will see her as unstable. Emily will testify that Maddie displays emotional volatility. If Maddie reacts, that is proof. If she stays quiet, I will push harder. She has always been easy to provoke. Then he paused in the recording. I swear I could feel the entire courtroom lean closer. Robert continued quietly. We need to get her to break. It is the only way to win custody easily. The judge will not take chances with an unstable mother. Once we show the footage of her crying, the parenting coach will confirm it. Everything will line up. The audio ended abruptly. Silence crashed over the room like a tidal wave. My breath trembled as I exhaled slowly. Robert sat frozen in his chair, his complexion drained of color, jaw clenched so tightly his teeth might have cracked. His attorney stared at him in horror, as if realizing for the first time that he had built his entire case on a lie that was now disintegrating in public. The judge finally spoke, his voice sharp but controlled. Mr. Hale, is this your voice in these recordings? Robert swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The judge leaned further forward. Answer the question. Is this you? Robert's voice cracked when he said, I do not recall making these recordings. His attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, we object to the admission of these files. Their authenticity has not been established, and they appear heavily edited. My attorney stepped forward calmly. Your Honor, these files were extracted from a device belonging jointly to the parties and found in the marital garage. The metadata remains intact. The recordings match the petitioner's voice, and the ring footage has verifiable timestamps consistent with previous entries submitted by the petitioner himself. The judge raised a hand, stopping the argument. Enough. The court will make its own determination. He turned to the clerk. Replay the first 30 seconds. The clerk complied. Robert's recorded voice echoed again through the speakers. Just push her during the hearing. Make her look hysterical. Mothers like her crack fast. Robert buried his face in his hands. The judge's expression hardened. His tone became grave. Mr. Hale, this court does not tolerate manipulation, coercion, or deliberate attempts to manufacture evidence. Before he could continue, the courtroom door opened slightly. Emily slipped inside quietly, wearing a beige blazer and a shaky smile, clearly expecting to be called as a professional witness. She froze when she saw the screen showing a paused frame of her sitting in Robert's car. Her smile collapsed. The judge stared directly at her. Miss Ward, please step forward. Emily's voice trembled. Your Honor, I do not understand what is happening. Marissa muttered under her breath. She understands perfectly. The judge gestured sharply. Come forward now. As Emily walked to the stand with small, trembling steps, Robert whispered harshly, Emily, do not say a word. She ignored him. Her eyes darted between the judge and the screen panic spreading across her face. The judge asked, Miss Ward, is this you in the video? And is that your voice discussing strategies to manipulate this court? Emily stammered, I was only giving advice. I did not mean harm. Robert told me he needed help. He said she was unstable. He said she was dangerous. He ordered the clerk to pause the video. Then he said, Miss Ward, this is not advice. This is collusion. This is intentional interference in a custody proceeding. Under Ohio law, this is a serious offense. Emily began shaking her breath shallow. Robert glared at her with pure hatred, as if blaming her for everything unraveling. I watched them both spiral. Two people who once believed they were untouchable, now exposed in front of a judge who saw through every layer of deception they built. The judge looked at me then. Mrs. Foster, the court has more to review, but I assure you these revelations will be given full weight. For the first time in months, warmth spread through my chest. This was justice. This was truth rising to the surface, and the fight was no longer uphill. It was shifting in my favor. The judge removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, the kind of gesture that said he had heard far more than he ever expected when the hearing began. The courtroom remained suspended in a thick, almost electric silence. The clerk slowly lowered the volume on the speakers. Robert sat rigid, staring straight ahead with a frozen expression while Emily fidgeted with her blazer sleeve as though hoping she could shrink small enough to disappear. My attorney stood with a quiet, controlled confidence I had never seen in him before. He looked calm, almost solemn, as if acknowledging the magnitude of what the judge had just witnessed. The judge finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy. "This court will address several matters immediately. First, I want the record to reflect that the evidence presented today reveals deliberate manipulation and coordinated efforts to influence the outcome of these proceedings in a way that directly harms the child." He turned his gaze sharply toward Robert. "Mr. Hale, the recordings show intentional coaching coercion and attempts to provoke emotional distress in the respondent for strategic legal advantage. This court considers such actions to be a form of emotional abuse and serious parental misconduct." Robert shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening until a small twitching muscle jumped near his temple. He looked furious beneath the fear that had begun to unravel his expression. The judge then turned to Emily, who was clutching her purse with both hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Miss Ward, your participation in this matter raises grave concerns. Interference with custody proceedings, providing biased testimony, influencing the minor child indirectly through the petitioner, and collaborating to create misleading narratives places you under scrutiny for potential criminal investigation." Emily's breath hitched. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Do not respond without legal counsel present. You are no longer functioning here as an expert witness. You are a potential participant in misconduct." Emily's eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Robert, who refused to look at her, staring stubbornly down at the table instead. It was obvious their partnership had dissolved the moment their secret alliance was exposed. The judge shifted his attention to my attorney. "Counsel, do you have anything further to add before I issue interim orders?" My attorney stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. The respondent would like the court to consider immediate protective measures for both Mrs. Foster and the child, including a temporary no-contact order due to the clear evidence of emotional manipulation and the petitioner's admitted intent to provoke psychological distress." He also requested that any future visitation for Robert be supervised pending further investigation. Robert's attorney shot up immediately. "Your Honor, this is an extreme overreaction. My client has not committed any criminal act. This is a misunderstanding taken out of context." The judge looked at him with a stern expression that silenced the room. "Mr. Green, the words I have just heard were not taken out of context. They were spoken with the intention to mislead, provoke, destabilize, and ultimately harm both the child and the respondent. You would be wise to advise your client on the severity of this situation." Robert's attorney slowly lowered himself back into his seat. His confidence had evaporated along with every illusion of control they once held over this courtroom. The judge straightened his posture and continued. "The court will now issue immediate orders. 1. The respondent, Madeline Foster, is granted temporary full custody of the minor child, Lila Hale, effective immediately. 2. The petitioner, Robert Hale, is subject to a temporary no-contact order. He is to have no direct communication with Mrs. Foster or the child until further notice. 3. Any future contact, if allowed after investigation, will be supervised, visitation only pending psychological evaluation. 4. The involvement of Miss Ward in this case is suspended. The court recommends a formal investigation into her actions, including the nature of her previous statements to this court. 5. The court will also be submitting all evidence gathered today to the county prosecutor's office for review regarding potential criminal conduct, including attempted custodial interference, filing misleading information to the court, and emotional endangerment. My breath caught in my throat as the weight of each sentence settled into reality. This was far beyond what I had dared to hope for. Not only was Lila protected, but Robert's entire constructed narrative had crumbled before him. He no longer controlled the story. He no longer controlled me, and he no longer controlled our daughter. Robert leaned forward abruptly. Your Honor, please. I am her father. I would never hurt Lila. I was under pressure. Emily told me this would help. I never meant to harm anyone. The judge lifted a hand, halting him with a sharp command. Sit down, Mr. Hale. His tone carried the unmistakable authority of a man who had reached his limit. The court will not entertain any further statements without counsel. Robert sank back into his seat, his chest rising and falling rapidly with anger and panic. Emily looked on the verge of tears, her carefully composed professional mask fully shattered. Meanwhile, I felt something inside me unlock something that had been sealed shut for months. Relief, safety, the faintest spark of hope. The judge turned back to me. Mrs. Foster, the court recognizes your efforts to maintain stability through difficult circumstances and commends the steps taken to protect your child. You will be contacted with follow-up requirements. For now, the court advises you to ensure a safe environment for yourself and the minor. My eyes stung. I nodded, unable to speak without breaking into tears. Marissa squeezed my hand again. Her steady presence kept me grounded, kept me from floating away under the intense emotional release hitting me all at once. When the judge adjourned the hearing, the bailiff stood at the ready. Robert attempted to rise and approach the bench, but his attorney grabbed his sleeve, stopping him with a low warning. Emily hurried toward the back exit, only to be blocked by the bailiff with a curt gesture directing her toward the hallway where investigators waited to speak with her. The gallery whispered softly in disbelief, murmurs rolling through the room in waves. Some stared at Robert with shock. Others looked at me with sympathy. A few shook their heads in disappointment at the depth of deceit that had been revealed. I gathered my belongings slowly, still processing everything that had just happened. My attorney approached me with a rare smile. You did well, Maddie. Better than you think. This was a turning point. This was the truth, taking its rightful place. As Marissa wrapped her arm around my shoulders and guided me toward the exit, I finally exhaled fully. The fight was far from over, but for the first time it felt winnable. My daughter was safe. The lies were unraveling, and justice was finally catching up to the man who had tried so hard to break me. In the weeks following the hearing, my life felt as if it had been lifted out of a storm and set gently onto solid ground for the first time in years. The house that once held echoes of slammed doors and tense silence now felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet, like it was catching its breath after months of suffocation. Lila adjusted faster than I expected. Children often do when they finally feel safe. She slept deeper, clung less tightly to me at night, and her drawings began to change. Instead of lonely figures standing far apart, she drew us holding hands under bright skies. One afternoon, she even drew Marissa standing between us with a bright smile like a guardian figure watching over us. I kept that drawing on the fridge. I needed it there as a reminder of what we had survived and who we had become. Robert's no-contact order remained in place. His attorney filed a few polished motions trying to soften the strictness of the restrictions, but each one was denied. The judge made it clear that any contact would only be considered after a full psychological evaluation and a formal investigation. Emily's situation unfolded quietly but swiftly. She was placed on administrative leave from her job within days, then terminated. Her attempts to defend herself only made things worse, especially when the county prosecutor opened an inquiry into her involvement in the manipulation of the custody process. Her polished reputation crumbled piece by piece until she was left with the same look she had worn when the judge confronted her in court, a mixture of disbelief and fear. Robert's downfall took longer but carried a heavier weight. The prosecutor's office requested the full digital files, the ring footage, the voice memos, and every detail involving his attempts to mislead the court. Each time my attorney updated me, he sounded increasingly certain that consequences were not just possible but likely. Not overnight, not immediately, but steadily. Accountability moves slowly, he would say, but it moves. I spent more time with Marissa during those months than I had in the past several years combined. She flew between Colorado and Ohio every few weeks, refusing to let me handle anything alone. It was Marissa who suggested we move. She said the house had too much history soaked into the walls, too much fear embedded in the edges of rooms, too many nights of pretending everything was fine when it was falling apart. And she was right. So I sold the house. The process was smoother than I expected, almost symbolic of shedding an old life. The profits were more than enough to cover a fresh start. I rented a small but cozy two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood just 10 minutes from Marissa's best friend who lived in the area. It had soft carpet sunlight pouring through the windows every morning and a little balcony where Lila loved to sit and watch birds. I bought secondhand furniture, arranged everything slowly and thoughtfully, and painted one wall in the living room a warm shade of sage green. For the first time in years, home felt like a place I wanted to be, not a place I endured. Lila started therapy soon after we moved. A gentle-spoken child counselor helped her process everything she had heard and seen. The sessions were simple at first, filled with crayons and soft pillows and sand trays, but little by little she began talking more openly. She began trusting that the adults around her were not going to twist her words or turn her fears into weapons. Meanwhile, I began something unexpected. I started a small baking business from our apartment. Marissa encouraged me, reminding me that I had always been the one who brought homemade cupcakes to school events and baked bread on weekends just to fill the house with a warm smell. I designed a simple online menu, shared it in a local community group, and within 2 weeks I was baking full-time. My kitchen became my sanctuary. Every bowl I mixed felt like reclaiming a part of myself Robert had tried to crush. Every warm loaf felt like a step toward independence. Every new customer reminded me I was capable of building something on my own, something good, something steady. One afternoon, as I watched Lila race Marissa to the swings at a nearby park, I felt a soft warmth settle over me. The wind rustled the leaves, sunlight filtered through the branches, and the world felt stable for the first time in far too long. I found myself smiling without forcing it. When the prosecutor finally contacted my attorney 3 months after the hearing, I sat on the couch gripping my phone tightly as the update came through. Robert was officially being charged with attempted custodial interference, emotional endangerment, and providing misleading information to the court. His case would proceed to a separate hearing, and the prosecutor believed there was more than enough evidence for conviction. I sat very still for a moment after the call ended, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Robert had once been the man I believed would be my partner in life. Now he was a stranger standing across a chasm he had created through cruelty and deception. I did not celebrate his downfall, but I felt peace knowing he could no longer hurt Lila or twist my reality. Emily faced her own consequences quietly. Her license was reviewed by the state board. She was barred from providing any form of custody-related evaluations until the investigation concluded. Her career was effectively over. She tried reaching out to mutual acquaintances hoping for sympathy, but the recordings had burned every bridge she once relied on. Justice had not been instant, but it had arrived piece by piece. As spring turned into early summer, Lila and I settled into a new rhythm. We built routines that were soft and stable. Saturday mornings meant pancakes. Sunday afternoons meant walks along the river. Evenings meant reading bedtime stories until she fell asleep curled beside me. One night, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Mommy, we are safe now, right?" I stroked her hair and whispered back, "Yes, sweetheart, we are safe." And for the first time, I truly believed it. My life was not perfect. Healing was not linear. There were nights when memories clawed at me when the sound of a raised voice in the distance made my pulse jump. But I was not the woman who cowered in her kitchen anymore. I was not the woman who apologized for things she did not do. I was not the woman who doubted her worth. I was a mother who fought, a sister who survived, a woman who rebuilt. As for the future, I knew it was mine again. And every time someone ordered a dozen cinnamon rolls or a tray of cookies from my little baking business, I felt a spark of pride, a small, steady flame of independence that no one could ever take away again. At the end of each day, as I tucked Lila into bed and turned off the lamp, I whispered a quiet thank you into the dim room, not to fate or luck, but to the small circle of people who saved me, to Marissa, to my attorney, and most of all, to my daughter. She had been the unexpected hero, the small, brave voice that cut through the lies and brought truth into the light. She did not just save me, she saved us both. The storm had passed, the sky was clear, and for the first time in years, the horizon looked wide open. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If you are still here listening at the end, that means a part of this story touched something in you. Maybe something familiar, something painful, or something you have carried quietly for years. I know today's story was heavy and emotional, and I want to take a moment to breathe with you, to slow down together, after everything we just walked through. Stories like this are not just entertainment. They are reminders of how easily someone can lose their voice, how quickly manipulation can spread inside a home, and how deeply a child can be affected by the choices of adults. And they are also reminders that the truth has a way of rising, even when it is buried under fear and doubt. I want to ask you something from the heart. Have you ever seen a situation like this in your own life? Maybe a friend who was controlled by a partner, maybe a sibling who was manipulated, maybe you yourself lived through something that nobody else knew about. You do not have to share details if you do not want to, but if you feel even a little brave today, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Someone else reading your words might feel less alone because of you, and if you have ever been through anything like this, I want you to hear me clearly. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. You deserve to be believed. You deserve to rebuild your life just like Maddie did, step by step, breath by breath. Healing is not easy. It does not happen overnight, but it is possible, especially when you have people who stand by you the way Marissa stood by her sister. Do you have someone like that in your life? Someone who showed up when everything felt impossible? If you do, tell me about them. If you do not, then I hope this community can be that place for you. And I want to say thank you truly for giving me your time today. You could have watched anything, but you chose to spend these minutes with me and with this story. If you want more stories like this filled with truth, emotion, justice, and resilience, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow, but more importantly, it helps these stories reach someone who might need them. And before you go, tell me one last thing in the comments. Where are you listening from tonight? I love seeing all the cities and states show up. It reminds me that even though we are all scattered across the country and the world, we sit together for a moment inside the same story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And take a deep breath. You made it to the end. You are stronger than you think.